The first thing we have to discuss when it comes to optimizing Calcharo's quick swaps are team compositions and rotations in general. As of right now, in Wuthering Waves, there are two main ways I've seen people build teams, and both of them have a different type of rotation associated with them. Team number one is going to be what most people consider meta, and a very familiar setup if you've played Genshin Impact. It revolves around having an on-field DPS who will take up most of the field time, an off-field sub-DPS who you generally want to either buff your on-field DPS, provide extra damage from off the field, or ideally, do both at the same time. And then your last character will be there to help you with survivability as well as provide further buffs for your team. These teams generally have a DPS rotation that is relatively simple to execute. You tend to just cycle through your 3 characters, use all their skills, echo skills, ultimates, usually starting with your support, then your sub DPS, and then landing on your on-field DPS character who takes most of the field time for himself, and after you run out of your buffs, you cycle back to your support and start the rotation all over again. For Calcharo, his currently accepted meta team of Calcharo, Sanhua, Verina can be played exactly like this. You cycle from Verina to Sanhua to Calcharo, at which point you want to keep him on field for 14 seconds to make sure you'd make the most of Sanhua's outro buff, and then once you finish, you go back to Verina and start the rotation all over again. The big upside to such a static rotation is that they are very easy to learn and execute with little practice. Playing such a team and following such a rotation is perfectly fine for Tower of Adversity. The enemies are generally just punching bags, and even the boss enemy's AI isn't going to be as rough to deal with as higher difficulty hologram bosses. Speaking of hologram bosses, that's where the downside comes in for these types of rotations. Since you actually have to fight those bosses and not just treat them as punching bags that are rooted in place with their only attack being a headbutt every 20 seconds, you will not be able to force your DPS rotations on them, and your damage windows will be very limited to when the hologram boss has a big opening for you to wail on them, which, outside of having their stamina bar broken, is almost never going to happen. Now, team number 2 is where it gets interesting. These are what I like to call dual DPS teams. These teams generally still have a support, and one of your 2 DPS characters will still be taking up ever so slightly more field time, but your sub DPS plays a much more active role. Not only that, but you open up team compositions which may look like hot garbage on paper, but actually perform super well in practice once you get a hang of how to play them. So if you ever wanted to play Calcharo and Gian on the same team, well, honestly I still wouldn't recommend that, but it can sorta work. For these types of team compositions, you will generally not care too much about the outro buffs that your sub DPS provides, mostly because you will be swapping between your characters a lot, and the way outro skill buffs work, you tend to lose them as soon as you swap your character off the field. Instead, the most important factor will be how easily you can front load your damage on your sub DPS. How you want to use this team is by utilizing quick swaps to swap over to your sub DPS while you are locked in a long animation, and then do as much damage as possible before swapping back to your main DPS. While most "this changes everything" guides usually tell you to just, swap to another character, do a few attacks before swapping back, that doesn't really add much DPS in the grand scheme of things if you just throw a few random normal attacks in there before swapping back. In fact, if you just do that, it's actually a net DPS loss, because those 3 or 4 normal attacks will add less overall damage than if you just stayed on field with an outro buff. Instead, what you want to do is to use the long animation of certain attacks to use your skills, echo skills, and ultimates. This makes characters who have quick skill animations and just one big hit burst ultimates, and echo skills which have quick animations, very desirable. Technically, Sanhua still fits this description, since both her skill and her ultimate are just single hits, and is most certainly still one of the better options to use with such a playstyle. But is she going to be the best option? We'll get back to that question in a bit, but first, let's discuss what moves Calcharo should be quick swap cancelling to truly maximize your damage output. His first quick swap move is going to be your enhanced heavy attack, the one you get once you have 3 stacks of your passive. His second quick swap move will be your enhanced heavy attack during your ultimate, which you actually start out with right after you cast your ultimate, and then subsequently gain access to by landing 5 basic attacks during your ultimate. If you truly want to go full crackhead mode, you can also utilize quick swaps during his last basic attack, but generally speaking, his 2 enhanced heavy attacks are going to be the ones you want to cancel pretty much all the time. The way you actually use quick swap is by paying attention to when the animation for the attack you want to quick swap from starts, then as soon as it does, you swap over to your sub DPS, use any 2 of your skill, ultimate, or echo skill, or in the case of quick swapping from his last basic attack, any one of the following, and then swap back to Calcharo. One thing you have to pay attention to is to not use quick swap while you are in the middle of using your 3 skills, since that will put the skill on cooldown. So now that we know what moves we will be quick swapping from, and also that we want to actually do meaningful damage during our swaps instead of just poke at the enemy with a few meaningless basic attacks, what exactly will our rotations look like? As far as starting out with your support, then doing whatever it is your sub DPS does, and then rotating into Calcharo, that part doesn't change at the start. But once that's out of the way, you won't constantly keep Calcharo on the field, but use every opportunity you have during enhanced heavy attacks to swap over to your sub DPS. Since Calcharo's rotation generally takes 5 to 6 seconds, after which your skill will have a 4 to 5 second cooldown on it, your ideal sub DPS candidates will have skill cooldowns that line up with these timings. While on a spreadsheet, 10 seconds seems to be the ideal skill cooldown for your sub DPS, since you can use an enhanced basic attack every 10 seconds on Calcharo, that does not account for his ultimate's enhanced heavy attacks, nor animation length of skills. So in practice, you will be swapping way more frequently than every 10 seconds. As such, having a lower than 10-second skill cooldown will be ideal for a seamless rotation and to squeeze in as much damage as possible. The big upside of such a playstyle is that your rotation is generally going to be very dynamic and flexible, which makes it perfect against hologram bosses where once you hit difficulty 4 and above, you will simply not be able to force your static rotation brainlessly. The downside is that honestly, it's pretty damn hard to execute and requires a bit of time to get used to playing at such a fast pace. So remember how we talked about Sanhua being the ideal sub DPS for Calcharo in the first style of team composition, and how even though she is still pretty good for the second style of team composition, she might not be the ideal partner? And before all the meta spreadsheet, well actually, keyboard warriors jump at me in the comments, I get it. You like to play your games in Microsoft Excel, and that's perfectly fine. But when it comes to practice, you very often end up with unorthodox playstyles and methods actually outperforming the currently established meta in pretty much every game. If we played Tekken like that, for example, everyone would be spamming pause, burning fist, unblockable. Bro, it's like 100 damage in a single hit and it's like a 1-second animation. That's the highest DPS in the game, no combo even comes close. But we all know that's not how you play Tekken. Also, for reference, all the high difficulty hologram clears I've seen have been either by whales or similar non-meta dual DPS team comps to the ones I used to clear the difficulty 5 holograms, so make of that what you will. Anyhow, with that little rant out of the way, let's take a look at what teammates he could run in such a dual DPS team comp, and also what echo skill your sub DPS should ideally be using. As we previously discussed, the ideal partner for Calcharo will have low skill cooldowns, high burst damage that they can front load, and quick animations. Taking a look at the currently available roster, we can see that as of now, the characters who fit all of these criteria are going to be Danjin, Spectro Rover, and Chishia. Not exactly the names you were expecting in a guide focused on Calcharo, right? On a side note, while not technically meeting the skill cooldown requirement, Havoc Rover is also a very good option instead of Spectro Rover, especially against the Morning Ike's hologram fight, since he does get access to 2 casts of his skill, and his enhanced basic attacks while his skill is on cooldown also do considerable damage. Also, while I don't have Encore, I have seen Rexland utilize a similar playstyle with Calcharo and Encore as a dual DPS team to clear high difficulty holograms, so I'm pretty sure she works well too. As for the ideal echo skill to use, I strongly suggest to run at least a 2-piece of Lingering Tune set with the Mech Abomination as your active echo. Without going into too much detail for now, since that could take the length of another entire video, just trust me, it's the best summon echo in the game, just use that. And for the characters I do have, I'll show you a few combos here at the end of the video to give you an idea of how you would utilize the quick swaps to maximize your damage output. I hope you found this little guide useful, and if you did, please drop a like and subscribe to the channel. Or if you didn't, then just leave a dislike. If you have any other strategies or tips I might have missed, also let me know about it in the comments below. I'm Dr. Misk, until next time. And in the meantime, enjoy these combos. Peace!